checking something. All right, so let's move on to these others. These others are charm, gamma, and vana, and I'm going to handle them in that order. Um, for those who are new and don't know what the second order Greeks are, you don't need to know what the second order Greeks are, but when you learn the second order Greeks, it's like a veil has been lifted from your trading, at least for me. The second order Greeks are a change in the change of something, whereas delta was the change in the underlying, just a change of something. So a change of a change is called a second order derivative. Now, why is that important? Charm is time. Gamma is the underlying spot price. Vana is volatility. So what do we have here? We have charm, which is a measure of how much delta changes per unit change in time. Gamma, how much does delta change per change in the underlying? Vana, how much does delta change per change in volatility? They all can be isolated by themselves, meaning if I hold volatility constant, Vana really doesn't matter. If I hold spot price constant, gamma doesn't matter. I can't hold time constant. I'd like to, but I can't.
Hey, Paul, one thing really quick.
Yeah.
Sorry to disrupt, but I think it may be helpful for new people to think about is as like an example. You can think about Delta as like a massive ship, right? That's just sailing. And then Charm, Gamma, and Vanna are going to impact the direction of the ship, or like if it needs if it needs to shift, or like how fast it shifts, something like that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. There's a couple ways that I like to describe it. If Delta is a super tanker, the Charm, Gamma, and Vanna are little tugboats that are pushing and nudging it around, right? They're kind of pushing the bow of the ship around a little bit to, change this way, change that way, whatever the case may be. They are change and delta related, but they all have different things that they measure. Another way to look at it, if any one of you guys and gals had Hot Wheels when you were a kid, remember you put the Hot Wheels on the track and on big orange track, and some of us had big D-size battery accelerators in that Hot Wheels track, right? And as that car goes through those big accelerators, spinning wheels that are powered by D-cell batteries, you spit the car out the other end faster. Those spinning wheels are your second order Greeks, and delta is the velocity, or is what it was doing as it hit that. So it can amplify. Each of these can amplify whatever delta. It can also work against you, right? So again, in fact, Charm and Vanna, you can see they have different signs in this integral, right? One is green, the other one is red in the left-hand plane, and vice versa. In the right-hand plane, the Charm is red and Vanna is green, right? Now, the units are not the same. You can't add these numbers together, but you can compare the two numbers, and that's what we're going to do here next. Just like we compared the numbers in delta, we can compare numbers on the same row, and that's where the power of netstat really, I think, starts to come forward. So charm is time. It's the change in delta per unit time, and you've seen us throw that meme in the Discord, TikTok, right? And at the end of the day, for 0 DTE, time goes to zero. That is the reference point. And so as we approach time, time collapses or decays, what's called an exponentially decaying function. It gets just faster and faster and faster as we go into 4 p.m. New York time. That means the Greeks, all the second order Greeks, all collapse to zero at 4 o'clock also. So that's an important thing. So what you'll see, it's 9:30 in the morning New York time. If you run netstat or you go down to the channel, you'll see these numbers change as spot price changes because they all have some effect with spot price. But in the big picture, they're not normally changing a lot. In the afternoon, say after 2 o'clock, you're going to start seeing these numbers really start to change. And charm is the one that I want people to start paying attention to. So let's talk a little bit about charm. What is charm? So we had delta before, right? And you remember the delta looked like this, right? Delta for the SPX looks like this. And we also talked about an area of delta where the gamma function or all of these functions, they have either the out of the money calls have limited and there's nothing, there's no gamma there. It's all put dominated. And you can see, up here we got red zeros, right? So that's telling us that the deltas are all kind of maxed out up here. And then down here, when we did this, you can see we've got some green zeros here. And that's because all these puts are worthless and all these very limited calls are maxed out, right? So if the delta is 1 or -1, meaning they're like all the way maxed out, I'm not going to have any more charm because I've already hit my limit. I can't have a change in delta higher than 1 or 100, depending on how you notionalize it. So what this means is that there is a range, and I tell everyone, look at just the gamma function here, and where this thing starts budding out is where effectively you're going to have some charm. Now, what is charm? What are we talking about here? What's actually happening here? Well, where those contracts are not limited yet, they haven't hit their maximum delta values, charm exists. And charm can work in our favor or it can work against us. So I ran some charm charts, same charm charts that I ran as the delta. And lo and behold, we get a little bit different picture than what we had here, right? I'm just going to close this. So what this is basically telling us, right? So charm, it's laid out the same. Prices are here. So effectively, what we're dealing with when we have this, we have the charm of calls, which is here on the left-hand side, and the charm of puts here. Now, there's a couple of things that you really need to buckle down and memorize here, and hopefully it becomes second nature. So remember, in the money puts are over here in the left-hand plane, or excuse me, the right-hand plane, right? We have two things. We have in the money puts or we have out of the money calls. It's the only two options you get, no pun intended. And in both of those, right? So remember the deltas are positive for calls, but for an out of the money call, it's collapsing, it's decaying. Out of the money options decay. But if it had a positive delta, it means if I come back and look at this like midday tomorrow, it'll be even smaller, right? Same thing over here on the put side. This thing right now is saying whatever the units are, minus 1,000, whatever, 1,089, whatever the case. If I come midpoint tomorrow or midday tomorrow, it's going to be half that because it's decaying, right? If all things being the same. Why is that important in our conversation here? As a negative value decays, remember, this is negative deltas. Now it's smaller negative deltas. That's the same thing as adding positive deltas to the book. And so what we're effectively doing, and this is the important thing to take away from this, out of the money puts decay in such a way that the charm is positive. It's supportive. So you've heard the term, a well-hedged market does not collapse. What does that mean? A well-hedged market does not collapse. When we have puts underneath us, when the market has gone down or has gone up even, and there's a whole bunch, technical term, whole bunch of puts below us, they're supportive to deltas. Because as they decay, they're getting less negative, more positive, they're decaying. And that basically adds deltas to our book. When we add deltas to our book through the mechanism of decaying puts, charm, we're making our book longer, the dealer's book shorter, and all things considered, the dealer will have to adjust and hedge flat by buying. That becomes a mechanism to keep us supported underneath. So when we look at netstat and we see these two numbers right now in the left-hand plane, which we know is out of the money puts, we've got a net positive number. Why is it a net positive number? Well, you can look at these two graphs and you can see left-hand plane red here, green, together, the summation of those is pretty darn big. It's supportive underneath us. So the visual from this chart, even though it says it's out of the money and it's decaying, it's getting smaller. Right now, it's a fairly significant amount of positive deltas that are going into the structure. Now, over here, here's a potential issue. And we'll talk about why this is. Here we have in the money puts. Let's go look at this thing. Here are the in the money puts and out of the money calls. Right now, it's very clear the in the money puts have a lot of charm associated with them. And what do we know about in the money contracts, in the money options? They start limiting towards whatever their terminal limit value is. In this particular case, the terminal limit is -1 or -100. So all of these things are now going to start growing, right? This is additive to negative deltas. So how does this little read into netstat matter here? We have out of the money puts on the left-hand side. We have in the money puts on the right-hand side. Right now, the decay of the puts below us is adding more deltas to the book than what these out of the money puts are. Comma time. If spot price stayed fixed, right? If it literally stayed at 5409.65 tomorrow, nothing else moved. I know that's not realistic, but play the game with me. What's going to happen is that 57,366,755 number is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's positive, but it's going to start walking down because those out of the money puts are getting smaller and smaller. The contribution from the puts below us is getting less and less because they're decaying. What's happening to the in the money puts? The in the money puts, that -42,000 is going to go to -43,000, -44,000. And there's going to be some period in the day where those two are going to balance if spot price is the same, et cetera, et cetera. This is what you're looking for when you run the netstat command. You want to see where are we in the time of day and what's this overall balance right now. If, important note, if the right-hand plane is bigger than the left-hand plane, and independent of the time of the day, it's going to be really, really hard because you've got a headwind, right? You've got more negative deltas coming at you. And if it's controlled by in the money puts, it's almost a death nail to the bulls that day. They are not going to be able to get a lot of steam unless they start opening a lot of deltas to overcome the effects of just kicking back with their feet up on the table and letting TikTok charm do its thing. So what we look for here at GammaEdge is this. We're looking for who's in control of the charm equation. And we want to see, is it in the money calls, which is ideal because now you're starting to push deltas up and they're going to go towards their terminal limit. We don't have that for tomorrow, not with this data. We have out of the money puts. But if we had in the money calls, those would be accrued to the positive delta side and they would continue to grow through the day. So the out of the money puts, if we had some big spikes here that were green, that would be great. We don't have diddly underneath us. We saw that with the calls. There's no calls below us. And you can go look here. There's no calls. We don't have the structure under us to push us up from in the money calls. It doesn't exist. So tomorrow, when you're looking at netstat, waiting for this thing to go in the money calls probably isn't going to happen because they don't exist. You can look at the structure and say, all right, well, I'm waiting for something that could never happen because the structure isn't there. And this is why we say you've got to pay attention to the overall structure or read the structure. So the only thing that's going to happen tomorrow, effectively, from a charm perspective, is we're going to see more headwind develop from these in the money puts, and we're going to see less and less tailwinds counterbalancing this. And finally, later in the day, this is going to have collapsed. I mean, you're going to get a big spike in the money call here, but it's not going to be anything to go against this, right? I mean, just look at what we're battling against. You can't net these together and win the battle on the call side. It just doesn't exist. So this isn't going to happen. So the only way is now to start looking, oh, look at this 5,500 thing that's sitting out there. Remember we talked about 5,500 with the deltas. Let's think about what happens if we go over 5,500 with charm. If we go over 5,500 with charm, which is this, we have now taken all of these in the money puts and we've now made them decay underneath us. That's supportive. So as price walks up tomorrow, if we can get over 5,500 from the delta perspective and get those deltas underneath us, then perhaps we can get these to be supportive and now start being under, even though they're decaying puts. Yes, they're puts, but the puts are working in our favor. And you can see we've also got a couple call spikes that are here. If we make it up to 5,500, these will be underneath us too. We'll start getting some of the calls here to now start adding in. And you can see this pocket right here. We got 586, 159, 485. That literally is this stuff right here. Right? So go back here above the line. We've got these, right? That's from these right here, these calls. We look at this, and there they are. Boom, boom. All right. So what could happen tomorrow when you look at netstat? What you want to see is you want to be able to say, okay, where are the key strikes? 53, 55. That's pretty far down. Let's hope we don't get that far down. We've got positive charm, but we know it's decaying. It's decaying from those out of the money puts. We also have in the money puts, which are now basically sitting on us. And unless we get the intraday out of the money call action pushing us up in combination with closing of negative deltas from the puts that are below us, because they have fear in their minds that they're going to effectively lose any chance of profits, we can't make any headway. We're not going to make any headway. All right. So during the day, watch for these balance points. Watch for when the left-hand plane and the right-hand plane are balanced, and watch for when you start seeing in the money calls develop in this left-hand plane. When that occurs, you know they're going to start pushing you up, and that charm is going to be accretive to the positive side here. It's going to be supportive underneath. It's not going away. It's an in the money call. It's pushing towards one delta. That's what you want, right? Because as our book gets longer, dealers get shorter, all things considered, they have to buy, and that pushes us up. As we get pushed up in spot price, and this is going to move us to gamma here in the next discussion, as we get pushed up, we are now including more in the money calls below us. Deltas of the complex are going up, and it's going to put fear in the money put holders above us, and they're going to say, I'm going to lose my moneyness. I'm going to monetize. Well, when they slam those 50 deltas shut and lock those profits in, that also propels us upward, or we believe propels. So you get this effect of reversing off these bottoms. Look for it, and we can see it here. Okay, so now let's go look at gamma. Gamma is what everyone's here for. It's a great little tool. Let me grab the gamma chart. Actually, instead of using the 3D gamma, which,
Paul, I got one more question before we end this,
yes, sir.
because I know people are going to ask it. Can you go back to the netstat
I can.
graphic, please. So right now we can see that looking at net delta, the right-hand plane integral is bigly, technical term, bigger than the left-hand plane integral.
Yeah.
However, looking at net charm, we can see that the left-hand plane integral is providing more supportive charm flows than the right-hand plane integral. And that confuses me because I would expect the right-hand plane to be providing a lot more just given what we talked about with the net delta. So like should we be thinking that yes, that's the case right now, but we know that the left-hand plane integral is going to diminish over time while the right-hand plane is going to increase over time, or like how do we circle the square, for lack of a better term?
A great question. All right. And I apologize for not making it clear. The right-hand plane is in the money puts. All right. So these things are going to continue to grow towards a -1 delta. Do we agree on that?
Yep.
Okay. So these deltas that are up here associated with these in the money puts and the charm, which is currently dominated in the right-hand plane, are all going to grow. So if spot price remained constant tomorrow, I know that's not the case, but let's just pretend. This number would go -43, -44, -45, -50, -60, -75.
Yep.
It would just keep getting more and more negative. Why? These are in the money and they're growing. They're going to grow, right? They're going to grow. And that's if moneyness doesn't change. Now, what's happening over on this side? At the same time, this thing is growing because it's in the money. Remember, these two go together. The label and the integral go together. Tells you who's in control. Over here, the label and the integral tell you that we've got out of the money puts, and we know puts below us are supportive, but we also know these are out of the money and they're decaying. So they're going to get, at the same time, this is going to -43, -44 million, -45, -46. We're going to watch this baby come down -55, -53, -51. And there's going to come a point where there's going to be a parity. And then there's going to come a point where the right-hand plane, the -42, is going to be big. Run away. Why? Because all of those contracts are going to start limiting into their delta or into their terminal delta. And so there's little hope at this spot price. If we are in this spot price tomorrow, if we're in this 5409 area, there's little hope of recovery. Now, let's slide price up the chain a little bit, right? Well, when we get it towards that 55, so this is charm up here.
Yep.
As we start pushing price up, we're eating away at those in the money puts.
Yeah.
And we're forcing them into the out of the money status. And we're starting to include more, even though there's not a lot there, we're starting to include more calls in the money. So we've got kind of a double reinforcement going on here. Underneath us, we're going to have long deltas being added by all of this as price goes up, because the charm is going to be pushing those calls towards a terminal level of 1, terminal delta of 1. And these things here we're going to suck more. Basically, we're going to suck some of the in the money puts out of the equation and force them out of the money. And we're going to start squatting them down. And as they squat down, they're effectively removing deltas from the book because they're decaying, which is the same thing as additive. And that becomes a support mechanism.